thank you to our sponsors, Little Voices. Are you a teacher with a passion for drama, music and performance, or feeling stuck in the classroom? Little Voices gives you the chance to step into a role where you can truly inspire young minds through the arts. This is a company I know well and admire. They're passionate about child development, highly rated and genuinely transformative. With small group teaching, a focus on confidence and creativity, with the opportunity to guide children through Lambda qualifications, you can make a real impact. Plus, with the support of a nationwide franchise network behind you, you can run your own successful business, doing what you love while teaching in a way that truly fits your life.
Hello, and welcome to the Pit Pony podcast with myself, Sharon Corley,
and me, Sarah Dunwood,
in which we talk to teachers from all walks of life who exited the classroom from what they thought was a job for life and thrived on the other side of teaching. Coming up in this episode,
there wasn't much at all, to put it bluntly. I didn't have much to go on. I didn't know what I was going to be teaching my class for the remainder of the term. Bear in mind, it's now 2 days, more or less, before school starts. I'm going, well, hold on. I've got no planning. I don't know what they have been taught. There's no curriculum, in-depth curriculum map. There was a one-page document.
hello, Pit Pony listeners. Another episode for you with Rob Newlands. And I think you're going to like this one. It's another interesting story from a fellow group member from Life After Teaching who's kindly given up his time today to talk to us in what we always hope is going to be an educational, informative and inspirational session. So let's learn a little bit about Rob. Rob, randomly, in his own words, wanted to be a civil engineer. And in his second year at university, he visited a school and, in his own words again, fell in to teaching because by his third year at university, he'd applied to do a PGCE. And that put him nicely into the route of being a primary school teacher. Rob served in 3 schools and he rose very, very quickly through the ranks. Phase leader, acting assistant head teacher, and then head of his own school. Rob relocated to Cornwall for that, what he thought would be his first headship, but it was January 2022 to August 2023 that saw it as his final school, and he exited the profession. Hello, Rob, and welcome. Can you kindly tell us what Rob Newlands is doing today?
So I'm now a financial advisor.
Ooh, brilliant. And a lot of our group members, I think, will benefit from that as a route. And I know you've got some great information when we get to that part of the podcast. Rob, take us back. And I know that you've spent the week reflecting on your experience, to say the least. And Rob's just shared with us that he's sat in his office at work. How's it been on your reflection before we get into it? How's it felt?
Well, what I said was, when you take a step back and you try to objectively look at all the I went through and kind of bullet pointed all the main things that kind of went on and happened. And I went, how on earth can one person be subjected to all of that and then be expected to still do the job? I'm going, nobody would. But at the time, it's all you ever think about, that you just got to keep ploughing on, and that's how it is.
So, Rob, you're relatively young. You rose through the ranks quickly because the last headship, because that's what I'm going to take you back to. How old were you in January 22?
I think I just turned 30. Or it was about 29, 30. I can't remember the exact. All those years now have all kind of blurred into one, to be honest. But I think it was about 30.
So where should we start? Let's start from the back and work backwards. You relocated to Cornwall and you found yourself as a head teacher in a school, which is everybody's dream, really, if they're ambitious within teaching. Start there. How was your headship?
Challenging, I think, is the kind of one-word answer, I would say, when it comes to what headship was like. I'd always wanted to be a head. I'd always wanted to be a leader in a school. I think when I started, I'd always been aspirational. Now, I think a lot of leaders through my career identified me as, I'm putting this in inverted commas, upwardly mobile. Then if you guys have come across that phrasing, so I was upwardly mobile when it comes to career progression and taking jumps at any kind of opportunities that came about. And so I did, and it just so happens that every opportunity that came my way, I took it and went with it. And as you said, I rose through ranks very quickly. Wasn't necessarily my intention to do that so quickly, but it just happened. And I had a lot of experience based on I would say the lack of teaching experience I'd had, but within leadership, I got thrust into it really, really quickly. So coming back to your question about what my first headship was like, I was thinking, I'll be fine. I've had, I was assistant head teacher for 18 months, or acting assistant head teacher, because it was never formal. So I never officially appointed the role, but we'll come on to that later on as to why that was the case. And then I was head of school for, I think it was 18 months, just over 2 years, something like that. And I went, I'm ready for this now. And I think it was a complete rude awakening, which I know, you could say for your first headship for anything, but I think actually the experience that I was presented with was a particular challenge, and of which eventually ended up me leaving the classroom. So it is a really, really difficult one.
Set the scene, Rob. Set the scene of this headship.
I think to start with, I'll just go back to my interview, and there's some things which I should have spotted at the time. And in hindsight, I look back and I went, hold on, there's probably a reason for that. It was during this transition when it came to COVID. It was, mid 2021. So there were lots of rules when it came to what you can and couldn't do. When it came to interview. So I did some lesson observations. But one thing I was told that I wasn't allowed to do was look in the books, which I thought was weird. So I was like, okay, I won't look in the books, but I really want to, because that gives me this little snippet as to what's going on at school, and I wasn't allowed to in my interview.
Did they give a reason why? Did they?
They said because of their policies when it came to reducing transmission or whatever. Hold on. Anyway, in hindsight, I wish I'd have looked, because otherwise it would have given me a completely different story. But you always get sold on rainbows when it comes to moving to a new school, and some of the other podcasts you've joined, you guys, they've explained they changed schools and it was just a completely different kind of experience. And always do your due diligence as much as you possibly can when it comes, if you are moving schools. I know it's a slight aside. But anyway, coming back to the school, I went in for an interview. Interview went really well. I think it was 4 different candidates. And I just found it weird that I wasn't able to look in the books. Anyway, long story short, I got given the opportunity to join. And I was like, yeah, brilliant. I want to move back to Cornwall, because where I grew up originally. And I was like, I'm going to accept it. Fab. And it was a January start, which, what I will say is, it's not an ideal time to start your new headship. Is mid-year, particularly over Christmas. So, more or less, other weird things that went on before I even started is I wasn't actually even allowed on site before my contract started, which was officially on the 1st of January, I think it was, right? So I'm there. I had to move over Christmas. Already a really stressful experience trying to move, 250 miles from Seaford, where I lived originally up in Sussex, back down to Cornwall, and then trying to plan and prepare for a new headship, where I didn't really have a huge... I had, I think, 1 transition day, something like that, maybe 2, but it depends on the negotiations between the different schools. And yeah, I wasn't allowed any access before my contract started. So I was there a week before, back in Cornwall, couldn't go into the school, couldn't speak to anyone. I had no inset day either. So in hindsight, if you've got a new head coming in, surely the Academy leadership should consider that as a gift when it comes to trying to get us to know your team before you actually start your appointment. I had no necessary documents, and I was kind of left in the dark looking back on it, if I'm honest, when it comes to kind of starting. So, but it's only in hindsight when I wrote these last week that I actually realised that's kind of.
It's almost like I'm going viewing a property, but I can't go into the kitchen because of COVID. I can't have a look at any photographs. I can't go for a second viewing. This is shrouded in Sarah Dunwood. What are we thinking at this point?
I'm just thinking of the number of times which makes it sound like I've had a career where I've had like umpteen head teachers come through schools that I've worked at, which has not been the case, but two periods of time where I was a senior leader where we had new heads, and the transition handover was intense. They were in frequently. They were talking to staff, everything. I cannot imagine starting any job, never mind a headship, without at least some form of orientation beforehand. It's nuts.
It was quite tricky, but I think is transitioning, I think, from Sussex down to Cornwall obviously had its complexities when it came to actually how long I could do it, and it depended on my school too. But not an ideal way to start, to say the least. So anyway, I rock in first day of term. Now, what I haven't caveated is I was teaching full time. So, because it was a small school, we had 3 classes, and it was a teaching ed role, which I was fine with because I loved actually teaching. It's why we go into teaching in the first place, spending time with the kids. Now, I had been assured that I would be able to appoint someone to take, I think it was 2 days a week, 2 to 3 days a week. So, obviously, as I started my first week in this new school, I was teaching full time when it came to trying to understand where we were. So when I managed to get my keys to the school, I went in and went, right, what do I need to try and do? First of all, I need to figure out what I'm teaching to start with. And so I went on to try to find the shared drives, all this kind of stuff, which had been shown on the transition day they come in for, is where the bits and pieces were. There wasn't much at all, to put it bluntly. I didn't have much to go on. I didn't know what I was going to be teaching my class for the remainder of the term. Bear in mind, it's now 2 days, more or less, before school starts. I'm going, well, hold on. I've got no planning. I don't know what they have been taught. There's no curriculum, in-depth curriculum map. There was a one-page document, which was their curriculum.
There's clearly bugger all in the books because they wouldn't let you look in there.
So... There was. I think it was about 5 to 6 pieces of work in the English books when I joined in January.
There's clearly bugger all in the books because they wouldn't let you look in there.
And when I opened those books, and the first time I got into school, I went, oh, I was like, oh, shit. I'm in a bad position now. I've got a lot of work to do. Anyway, so I was lucky because I knew what they were vaguely meant to be learning, which was the Romans. And I'd just done that in my previous school when I went, right, I'm just going to pick up all the planning I had from my previous school and just teach that for 2 terms. I went, that'll keep me through to keep me going. So I kind of get to teach. I mean, the kids, the school, staff, they're all lovely, all wonderful. And they are brilliant. And I still regularly meet some of the teachers that I worked with at the time I was there, because they worked incredibly hard for those children at the school, but they weren't really given the opportunities to succeed because the policies, procedures, curriculum wasn't really there to make their life easier. And the fact that they were constantly reinventing the wheel. There were quite a few other things when I, went through the actual woodwork a little bit. I don't actually want to even mention what they are, if I'm honest. I don't want to, but should we say there was things that were happening which shouldn't be happening in a school. Not safeguarding related in anything like that, but when it comes to practices that probably shouldn't have been happening.
We will fill in the blanks. We can do. I mean, we're still aghast, really. Can I ask, is this part of a multi-academy trust? Was this a church school? Was it governors? What was the block?
It was an academy trust.
Okay.
And I'd worked previously in church schools and a local authority school, and this was my first experience of an academy.
You'd be amazed, Rob, how many people talk about their first experience of an academy and their very last teaching role. It's, yeah. Okay, so God, I'm on the edge of my seat here. Come on.
Okay, so I then figured out, and I went, how did the last head do it? Because she was teaching full-time. And it kind of turned out that the TA was doing a lot of the delivering when it comes to the teaching in the classroom. So I went, okay, well, cover is needed. That's fine. But I think it was a lot of the time. And, you know, I don't want to speak badly, particularly about other people in the profession, particularly. But long story short, the school needed a significant amount of work, way more than I ever anticipated before joining that school and agreeing. Because ultimately, the leadership of the trust should know where the position of that school is, but I don't think they did, in my opinion. I don't think they did. Or they knew, but just went ahead of it anyway. So I think for me to start with, I mean, trying to get to know a new school while also trying to prepare for a class when it comes to preparation, planning, leadership, school assemblies, which weren't happening at all when I joined the school. There was nothing. I had to come up with all new assemblies. I had to change the kind of systems in place because there wasn't any. I went, wow, okay, we've got a lot of work to do. And obviously, you can imagine that the brutality of the workload when it comes to trying to do that all at once. But, you know, I was an aspiring leader, and that's how I'd always been kind of spoken about. And I went, well, this is on reflection. Well, it must be normal for people who go into leadership. It is a rude awakening. I'd like to have thought I was going in with my eyes open when it came to the responsibility and the pressures of headship. But I think my experience is probably more extreme than others when it comes to taking that jump. I'd hope to think.
I think it's fair to say that leadership in a school is not for the faint-hearted. I think it is a huge job. It's a huge job. And particularly for teachers like yourself who've come up through the ranks. And also, let's remember this. You're 29, 30. You were an assistant head teacher in your mid-20s. You were a head of a school in your late 20s. So at this point, you've probably been teaching about 8 years. So I'm not saying that people can't go up quickly. You know, some of the best people I've worked with have been new into the profession. It's not about that. But this is insurmountable. You're doing full-time teaching with no curriculum to speak of in place. You're almost got one hand tied behind your back, both hands tied behind your back. You're blindfolded. Do you think the trust saw this school as their poor relation because it's a small school? Do you think that's what it was? It was overlooked. It was doing all right, so it stayed in the background.
So I'll answer your question in a second, but it's interesting what you're saying about hands tied behind your back, because that was a saying I've used an awful lot since leaving. I said it feels like I was trying to do the job with my hands tied behind my back while hanging upside down from my feet.
Wow.
It's genuinely what I've used to describe the role multiple times. So it's really, really hits home that you've actually just said it yourself. And when it coming back to the small school, I think we were, locality-wise, we were further away from the rest of the schools in the trust. We were further west. So the problem that we had is we didn't really have local schools within the trust, which I think made things more difficult, to say the least. Mm-hmm. Because when it comes to training, CPD, particularly pre-COVID, it's easier if you're local, but the school wasn't, unfortunately. And I think that definitely added to the challenges. And also because it was a good school. It had a good Ofsted rating and the data was good. But as we all know, that doesn't mean anything in the reality of schools, having good data and a good Ofsted doesn't mean it's a good school. In my opinion, anyway, because I think there's a lot of I worked when I was training in a few different schools that requires improvement at the time when they had those gradings, and I went, this school is, and I knew back then when I was training, this school is so much better than the good school that I spent other 3 months at.
Sarah Dunwood is nodding her head off to the point where it's about to fall off her shoulders. That's singing to your heart, isn't it, that, Sarah?
You don't want to cluster schools. I don't want to cluster schools according to those gradings, and I would never make judgments about what's going on in other people's schools. But from my experience of the schools that I worked in, the schools where I worked, where it was a requires improvement school, where we were clinging on by our fingernails in terms of the data to be requires improvement, which used to be, probably before you were born, Rob, satisfactory, because that's what it was when I was initially teaching. The work that goes in an RI school, from my experience, is so intense because you are on Ofsted alert constantly, and everything is just, there's just a real level of intensity to it, about policies, about practice, about making sure that lessons are bang on the mark every day, every lesson, all the rest of it. I worked in secondary, and it was relentless. But what was interesting about an RI school, from my perspective, was the togetherness of the staff under a leader who wanted to do the best for the staff and the children. And so I'm sure there are outstanding schools and good schools where that same level of intensity is there. And I'm not saying the intensity is the right thing. It shouldn't need to be that intense if you are trusting teachers to teach and they are doing it. But I do think it's a real challenge to be in an RI school. And I think it takes a particular type of teacher to stick at that. And our staff turnover, schools I was in where it was RI, staff had been there for, they stuck it through. They really stuck it through. So no, you're talking my language.
I think I do want to come back to the point you said there when it comes to staff turnover. Staff turnover in schools is so high, and there's a reason for it. I think just people either want to decide to stick their head in the sand and believe that teaching is wonderful. And in some respects, it absolutely is, as long as you're in the right environment. So there was, I don't know whether we're going to cover it, but it kind of lends itself to it now, I suppose. When I was at a school I never wanted to leave, which had that incredible environment. And I was happy. I loved the staff team. We did have high turnover because we had some heads leave, and that's why I went through the ranks really, really quickly in that school. But I never wanted to leave. Never. I loved that school so much. It was my first school as an NQT. I didn't want to leave, and I left because of politics. That was it. It was school politics. Because I was acting assistant head teacher, and the new substantive head who came in, who had kind of inherited me as a acting assistant, didn't want me. That was it. I didn't want to go. I was offered a head of safeguarding, and I went, no, I want head teacher in my job title. And because I was, we'll go back to it again, upwardly mobile, I was like, well, I don't want to stay then, because actually I'm career driven. I want to become a head teacher. That is what I want to do. So I'll leave. I'm leaving. And I said, I won't have my notice in until I've got a job, but I will be leaving as soon as I can. And I never wanted to. I remember on my last day, I'm sure people out there who are listening can kind of understand this. I remember that we're in a church. So it was a C of E school in Eastbourne, and beautiful church. I mean, it was incredible. We had, 270 pupils, and then we had, another 100 parents. It was at end of year service. I stood up and did a speech. I couldn't speak a word. I just bawled my eyes out. I never wanted to go. And half the parents were crying as well. I'd be like, oh, this, it's going to be difficult to say anything. And unless any of them are listening now, they know the reason why I left. I never wanted to. But I never told anyone that.
It's hard, isn't it? Because I know I've left schools because, like you, I was upwardly mobile. And when you can see a ceiling in a school, not that anything was wrong in the school. There was the school that I'm thinking of was just the most glorious place to work. It really was. And I did not want to go, but I wanted to go to the next step, and I could not see that there was going to be an opportunity in the next 5 to 10 years for me to do that in that school. So my choice to move was purely for career progression. And why not? There's nothing wrong with that. And I was the same age as you at the point where I did that. I was 29, 30, and went to assistant headship in a completely different school, completely different authority, completely different context. It was bonkers. The extremes were bonkers. And it was quite possibly one of the most devastating days of my career life was walking away from that building, those kids and the people that I worked with, but knowing in my heart I would stagnate if I stayed there.
And it wouldn't be that school after a couple of years. It would be a place of resentment and bitterness, and the halcyon image that you have and the love and the homely feel, you would have become bitter and resentful. And so it is natural, Rob, and it's almost like a sliding doors. I wonder what would have happened if I stayed, but you did, and you did. So let's go back to this straitjacketed position that you found yourself in. You're teaching potentially 5 days a week. That might have eased off. You're trying to establish yourself here at the helm of this school. What's happening on a day-to-day basis with you as an individual? Have you made any headway at this point? Are there any successes, any wins? Does it start to shift?
I think I started to get to grips with the school. And the most important thing, I think, when it came to particularly becoming a leader within a new school, within a new environment, is to be able to understand your team and understand what makes them tick, what's important to them, how and in which ways you can to try and make sure that they feel valued. Because for me as a leader, I'd worked for people where I didn't feel valued, and it disincentivized me, and I didn't do as good a job as I could have done if I had a leader who valued what I did. It was the small things, just the small things. I heard you teaching that the other day, Rob, when I walked past the classroom. It was brilliant how you explained that. It's just those minor comments which mean a lot, and lots of leaders don't understand why this is important. It is things such as I'd write like a thank you card. So at the end of every term or half term, I'd write a thank you card. Or it might be on a random occasion, and I'd say exactly why. So I'd spend the time. It would take bloody ages, I will say. And I didn't even have a big staff team. So this is when I was head of school. I would literally write a card at the end of every half term about why I appreciated what everyone was doing, and outlined one specific example so that everyone knew I was watching and listening and valued what they were doing. And that's the kind of leader I wanted to be. And that was quite difficult, because I didn't really know what was going on, because I was always in the classroom. So it came back. So it was about 3 months or so, 2 to 3 months. When it comes to recruitment, it can be very tricky. So I was lucky in that respect, where one of the teacher who came to class share with me was in one of the other schools in the trust. She's probably listening. So hi, I won't say her name, but she's probably out there. She's one of the ones I go to coffee with. Brilliant teacher, incredibly hardworking, and I'm incredibly grateful that she came. Anything else could have happened at the time. I could have had someone else who would have needed to spend a lot of time trying to upskill or to try and help deliver the quality of education to the children in that classroom that I wanted. I didn't have to worry about that because she was great. And I'm so grateful for that, because I can't even imagine what would have happened if she hadn't been there and joined the school at the time. So when I got some time, that then allowed me to try and start thinking a bit more strategically about where we were, rather than just, until that time, it was literally day by day. Coping with parents. We did have some challenging parents, you could could say, who required quite a lot of time. And also, being a three class school, there was no other leaders. And that comes on to a point I'll raise a little bit later on as well, when it came to be a leader in a small school.
Well, I'm just going to interject there because, again, I've been in big schools and little schools, smaller schools. Secondary school is not little, but I was in the smaller size secondary school, and you have that problem with leadership, because it doesn't matter the size of the school, that in terms of the number of children, the same leadership tasks need doing. The same policies need to be there. The same rules and regulations and statutory guidance and everything that needs to be done still exists and still has to be implemented. So when you've got a smaller team, that puts more pressure on the individuals in that team. So if you're the sole leader in the school, everything rests on your shoulders.
Yep.
That's untenable.
Yeah. The thing is that, the teachers I had were brilliant. They were really, really good. But when it came to experience of leading either subjects or expertise across the curriculum, we didn't really have it. And that was the challenge. So more or less, we had no curriculum. Don't get me started on the policies that you've mentioned, because that was 6 months of my life. Was those 2-3 days out of class was just rewriting every single policy known to man, because we didn't have one, or it was very out of date. So it was just incredibly difficult, because you're trying to do all of this on top of then having to deal with all the safeguarding issues, which would drag me out. I'm midway through teaching a really wonderful lesson, which I've taken ages to plan and prepare, because, you want to try and give the best to the children as much as you can. And then you just pull from pillar to post the entire time. I think I went through a couple of weeks where I literally couldn't stay in the classroom to deliver an entire lesson, because governor was on the phone, safeguarding concerns, social worker was on the phone. I had to deal with a policy or whatever it might have been. A parent had a complaint. And
at that point, you would expect that somebody from the trust would kick in and go, well, this doesn't work. We need at least another body to support leadership in that school, or another teacher.
Or to teach the kids.
Yeah, to teach the kids, to allow the head teacher, you or somebody else, to do everything that needed to be done, because I'm safeguarding all over, and it's only just now that I've put the jigsaw piece together and gone, oh my God, and you had to be the DSL dealing with all of that as well.
Brief interlude, dear listener. Couple of questions. Are you a tutor or even a pit pony considering tutoring? And do you fancy getting in the room with myself and Sarah Dunwood, learning about the wonderful world of tuition? Then why not join us at the National Tutors Conference, hosted by Connexus Tuition, on the 29th of July 2025. It's at Chesford Grange, Kenilworth. Links to the tickets are in the show notes below, and we will both see you on the other side.
So at what point, Rob, do you untie your hands from behind your back, stick your hand up and say, I need some help here. This isn't working out?
Quite quickly. And the thing is that I've always been of the opinion that asking for help is not a sign of weakness in any capacity whatsoever. And if a leader thinks that, I'm sorry, they shouldn't be a leader, to put it bluntly. I think you've got to be humble to go, I don't have the answer to that question, and to be able to say, I don't know, but hopefully I can ask some people who can help me or tell me the answer. So the whole time I was there, I was asking and chasing for support and help. So when it came to, obviously, an induction, We haven't mentioned about induction yet. I could see Sarah's face already. I think you know what I'm about to say. Put it this way. After my first 6 months, I fed back to the trust saying I was not impressed with the induction because I wouldn't really say I had one. So I had kind of a head teacher buddy, I suppose, who was at a separate school about half an hour away, was in the Ofsted window. So I don't blame it on her at all when it comes to her focus was on her school. It was a big school where it was in a position where it could have gone either two ways when it came to Ofsted grading. It was going to be an in-depth Ofsted review. I can't even remember what section they're called anymore. It's kind of a good thing I've forgotten, I suppose. It was the minimum 2-dayer. Yeah, that's it. Section 5. Yeah. So I don't blame her at all. But I think she probably visited 3 times in the first 6 months when I joined, maybe 4, to kind of go through how things were getting on, how I was finding things. But at the time, it was just survival on the day-to-day, and then trying to figure out just running the school, not having that strategic view about what was going on in any way. It was just day-to-day. And I think it was those after the first kind of term, I was going, we need some extra capacity here. And I was just chasing for either someone else to come and help me, or it could be me giving more time out of class to be able to do these things. I was happy to do it because that was my role as a head. I wanted to do it. So whether it was me or someone else doing it, that was fine.
I mean, to be fair, Rob, there's some pretty quick wins here. If you don't mind me saying, number one, put a classroom teacher in. I don't know if it was budgetary. I don't know what the issue was, but the obvious quick win for me is put a bloody teacher in the classroom. Get this guy out of the classroom. The second one is, if we're a multi-academy trust, why are you writing policies in isolation? Surely there could be some shared practice where that's concerned. If you are in a multi-academy trust, we hear the other end of the spectrum where every single teacher's got to use the same PowerPoint, the same everything. That is the actual point of a multi-academy trust. Surely the centralisation of resources and HR and all that kind of stuff. So it's still make sense for me at this point where A, there was some quick wins, and B, the solutions were lying within the bigger organisation. So I have no words, Sarah.
And the thing is, what I will say, it was a very new multi-academy trust. Okay. So 2 multi-academy trusts merged, I think, about a year before I joined, or about that kind of time. So I haven't mentioned this yet, but it kind of leads me on to it beautifully, is it was a new multi-academy trust. The CEO who appointed me had left.
Knew you were going to say that.
In April. So 3.5 months after I joined and was appointed, she left as the CAO. So at this point, the deputy CEO became the interim CEO, and we had no deputy CEO. So at the time that I started, there's a huge and massive transition within the whole upper echelons of the trust. And more or less, I think I slipped through the cracks. And I said this in my exit interview when I actually left. I said, I think I fell through the cracks. And I really hope you use this as a lesson so it doesn't happen again. I know, but I've come around a little bit, but
yeah. No spoilers. No spoilers. Come on up. I'm utterly invested in this.
So, and I do hope that they've learned from it. If anyone from there is listening, I do hope they have, because the thing is that a lot of the hearts are in the right place, but it was just one of these things that slipped through the cracks, and unfortunately, I was the one at the brunt of it. And so we had no deputy CEO at the time. We just had an interim CEO, and then we had kind of clusters, also like a head teacher in charge of a cluster of schools. Now, this is all up in the air as well, because this is all changing. We were then accepting more schools into the trust at the time too. So above me trying to just sort my own little school out, there's this complete change at the top end. So my school, which was, inverted commas, not at Ofsted risk, it was a good school with good data, I was at the bottom end of the priority list. Let's be frank. they've seen Rob in an interview. He's very capable of what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about, and he's very driven. Let's just leave him to it, is what I think they were thinking.
I'm going to add another layer to that. And when we didn't let him see the books, he didn't kick up a fuss. And when we've done this, and when we've done that. So not only that, you've signalled to them at this point that I think you're going to get your head down and get on with it, to be perfectly honest, because you've not kicked up a fuss realistically at this point.
Yeah, and I think in hindsight, I probably should have kicked up more of a fuss than I did. But because, in teaching, you've just got blinkers. And I didn't have a family. I've got my wife, who's incredibly supportive about everything when it comes to my whole career change, all that kind of stuff. And I can't thank her enough for all of that over the years. But there's no way you could have a family with what I was doing and the sacrifices that I was making for my career. And in hindsight, should I have done that? I don't think I should have done. But hindsight's a wonderful thing. But that's what I wanted at the time. And it's just, unfortunately, it's just the way it kind of turned out. So I'm there 6 months in. It's June time. I'm going, right, we've kind of haphazardly got away with what we're teaching this year. Right, I need to plan and get things sorted for September, because this year's more or less a write-off when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'm new in, understand where we are as a school, what we need to try and do moving forwards. And that's where I'm going to start using the curriculum I had at my old school, which was really good. It was for a small school. It was on a three-year rolling cycle. It was like topic-based. I absolutely loved that curriculum. It was fantastic. And now what I will caveat, all schools in that federation all came back as good. In a in the last year with Ofsted, and I'll come on to why that's a point now, in the last 18 months or so. And also they commended them on the curriculum, on top of saying I've forgotten what it's called now. It's probably a good thing I have. Wider curriculum. I can't even remember what it is. So that was excellent. So the extra opportunities that was given when it comes to kind of curriculum enrichment, that kind of thing, which really proves the depth you're going into when it comes to things you're covering, which aren't necessarily even statements you need to cover, but actually are just important life skills. So I went, right, I'm going to use that and I'm going to try and recreate it. I'm going to adapt, edit to fit with my school and the local community, all these different types of things. The difficulty with that is it was me, again, only me, because I knew the curriculum, or I knew it well, because I did it for 3 years in my previous school, which is what we did in lockdown, more or less. We did the whole new curriculum in lockdown. So I was like, right, I'm going to use this, implement it. It's going to be great. The difficulty I had is trying to get people on board with what we're doing, because ultimately it is my idea. I say it's my idea. The only reason I'm using it is because I've got nothing else and I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And we don't have capacity or experience to be able, or time to be able to create our own one. And the problem is we were the only school of this size in the trust when I joined. So when you're speaking about those policies, I did have some policies that I could use as an example, but I had to completely change them because if it didn't fit my school. Same with the curriculum. So we took things from other schools and tried to implement them within this. And I was like, okay, this works. But it was a very, very different way of thinking when it comes to delivering curriculum, of which it took a long time to really try and deliver it to my staff and explain what I wanted. And then you look back and you're going, actually, I need to give staff more account, let them go away and get on with it when it comes to being a leader. And in hindsight, I probably didn't do that as well as I could have done, but I don't think I could have let them go with it. That was the difficulty.
There's the fine line, isn't there, in terms of implementing something and then how quickly you give people agency over that without it going off on a tangent that you don't want it to. And that isn't about trusting in people's abilities or commitment to doing it, but it's fundamental. You're in a different sector now. I'm in a different sector. It's fundamental change management. You don't just go, right, we're doing this. Here you go, off you pop, crack on. There's a guidance phase as you implement things, and again, when you then talk about the capacity of the role and all of the rest of it, that becomes very difficult to manage it. I completely hear what you're saying, and I also completely hear what you are not saying, which is it was not about trust of the staff.
No,
It was, yeah.
It's just also for them. It's capacity for them. You know, I'd hope to think one of these leaders who's understanding and kind is what I'd like to think people thought. I mean, if they don't, that's, you know, you can't ever please everyone, and I understand that, and that's just the way it is. But I never wanted to be one of these leaders who just like, this is it, go away and do it. We're a team, we work together. I've got to have you on board. You might not agree with it completely to start with, but actually this is the route that we're going, and I take those things on board. Let's try and take them into account. So, kind of moving on from the curriculum, which is another challenge. So we kind of get started in September. We're pushing forward with this new curriculum, and we had new leadership within the trust join. So we had the acting CEO became the CEO, and we had a new deputy CEO join externally. So someone else had come into the trust. And so I remember in September we had an inset day for all the heads, or some kind of trainer day. And I remember sitting down and listening to this kind of workshop, I suppose, about curriculum. And I was sat there going, yep, don't have that. Don't have that. Don't have that. Don't have that. I didn't even think about that. And I'm going, oh my goodness me. Where did this all come from? Because this is all new. And the deputy CEO at the time, the new one, was a lead HMI inspector. Obviously, he's got the inside scoop when it comes to what Ofsted want, even though Ofsted don't necessarily tell you that that's what they want, or don't even update it. So I'm going, well, this has all changed since the last time that I've done the curriculum, and I've just spent the entire of my summer holidays trying to get this sorted, and now you're saying it's kicked out the window. I'm like, oh, shit. I've just spent all this time, because I know I'm not reinventing the wheel necessarily, but still, it's an awful lot of time and resources and capacity put into trying to get everything into place when it comes to, we know what we're teaching this year. And then dropping these absolute out of nowhere. We've never heard of this before. So I'm sat on the head with these really experienced heads going, where on earth is this from? So this is where I'm like, okay, shit, this is really, really not good. I need to check this. Because at this time, these curriculums that I was implementing hadn't been Ofsteded. So, which is why I said this earlier. They had, and it was fine, and it would have been no problem whatsoever. However, when it comes to trust, as you're speaking about earlier, when it comes to everyone must do it this way, that was what was happening. But the stuff wasn't it wasn't there for that to happen yet. So,
was this at the point where the framework changed to include the intent implementation and the other word that begins with I that I can't remember?
Yes, yeah, more. No, I think it might have been the year before. So I was already aware of these things when we started designing it, and we took these into account. But so anyway, I'm there going, oh my goodness, right. Straight away, that same day, I go to the deputy because he was speaking about Mocksteads. Yes, Mocksteads. So he would come in with other capacity from the higher echelon to the trust to come and do a review of the school. And I went over to him literally on the first day at lunchtime. I remember this specifically. I went over to let him know and I said, can you make my date sooner? I want you in as soon as possible. I'm not an idiot. I knew what was going to happen because my school was not in a good position. And I went, we need help now. Can you please come and do it now? And he said, no. I don't know when it is, but we'll come to you when we can. Because I was not a priority, even though I was asking for it. And I knew my school was not in a good position. And he said no.
Wow. I can't imagine I can't imagine a world where you go to somebody and go, I need help, or I know something's not right. Approached in the right way, on the front foot, and just come and help me.
Yeah.
No.
We're sitting down at lunch with a nice meal.
Wow.
On the first day he was delivering a session, I asked him to see whether I could bring the date closer so that I can get help sooner.
So if you take what you said a couple of minutes ago, you said, I am the type of leader who wants to make people feel seen and heard and valued. Okay? I took the time to write authentic thank you cards rather than the thank you and here's your mini pack of bloody Rolos or whatever you used to get in your pigeonhole. And the absolute opposite has been just done for you in September when you've wasted all of your summer and you've gone, can you come in and help me? I want that sooner. You could have been handled so differently. Rob, that's brilliant. I mean, can I just say for the first instance, I am impressed that you have come to me directly over lunch. You've asked for this. Can you leave it with me? Because there's a bigger picture going on here, as you can imagine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this request is listened to. I mean, that in and of itself, he might have known for a fact that was never going to happen. But in that moment in time, he would have still had you. It's people skills. This is a trust that wouldn't let you look at books, that wouldn't... It's not good.
You said the word people skills. Remember that for later in my story.